powerhouse, and internationally, our perspectives, our thought leadership, it is commanding greater attention. That's exactly what we are discussing today. Joining me for this important discussion is the distinguished Minister of Finance, the Honorable Dr. Ashni Singh. Dr. Singh, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much, Kiana, for inviting me. I think it's my second starting point. It's a great
Yes.
pleasure to be back.
I'm going to dive straight into our
Sure.
discussion. As I noted, the way the world is seeing us, it's changed dramatically. And you recently engaged in the 2026 spring meeting for the IMF and the World Bank. Tell us a bit about how these institutions view Guyana today and how our leadership is perceived.
Sure. So, once again, thank you very much. And I'm very happy, in fact, that you've invited me to back to the program. And in particular, that you have chosen to address this subject matter, Guyana's role in the region and in the world in this particular era, a subject that is very dear to my heart and a subject that I have had the privilege of being able to observe over a number of years how Guyana's place in the region and the world has evolved. So you are absolutely correct that Guyana now occupies a place of considerably more influence and considerably more respect globally, hemispherically, and regionally on almost all subject matters. And you make reference specifically to the IMF World Bank spring meetings, which I
Yes.
had the privilege of representing our country at. And I'm glad, in fact, that you chose those meetings as an example because they are a good example of how, not only how we are viewed and perceived, but also the interactions that we have and the contributions that we can make and how those have evolved over time. And if one were to look at over the years, our engagement with the international community and in particular the international financial institutions, one doesn't have to cast one's mind back too far to remember a time when we were a country in a very different place economically and therefore a country seeking support and assistance and advice. And we did so at that time because we were, in that period, bringing Guyana back from the brink of bankruptcy. In fact, we had gone Guyana in the 1980s, well, 1970s and 1980s, and towards the late 1980s, as we approached 1990 and turned that decade, Guyana had gone beyond the brink of bankruptcy, was essentially a bankrupt country. And so when the People's Progressive Party civic government assumed office in 1992, the immediate task before us was to bring Guyana back from bankruptcy. And that involved restoring our standing amongst the global community of nations, first as a democratic state, because prior to 1992 we were not a democracy. So restoring Guyana's standing as a democratic state and rebuilding the institutions of state, and on top of that, restoring our fiscal solvency as a country, bringing us back, like I said, from bankruptcy. And so we went through several years of initially IMF programs, structural adjustment programs, mobilization of concessional financing. At that time, putting ourselves in a position that would make us eligible for debt relief, making ourselves eligible and qualifying ourselves for additional financing, all within the context, like I said, of restoring fiscal solvency and the effort to achieving fiscal sustainability. And those were tough years, but we did the hard work. That generation of People's Progressive Party civic leaders, initially Dr. Chadi Jagan was president, a much younger Bharat Jagdeo was finance minister and then became an incredibly young president, Bharat Jagdeo. He was, of course, the president who appointed me as finance minister in my first term. That generation of people, he was also the president who appointed Minister Irfan Ali to his first ministerial term, as he was then known, Minister Irfan Ali to his first ministerial term, now President Ali, of course. That generation of People's Progressive Party civic leaders did that work. We did the hard work. But our engagement with the international community was characterized by the reality that we were a country at that stage implementing significant structural reforms and mobilizing primarily concessional financing, in fact, entirely concessional financing to support the rebuilding of our country and to assist with the restoration of solvency. That we did the heavy lifting. We implemented a lot of very tough reforms. We did a lot of hard work to make Guyana an attractive place for international investors and also domestic investors to invest their capital. And it is that work that led us to this point where we are today. And we must never forget that period and the effort that it involved and the work that was involved in getting us to that point, or to getting us to the point where we are today. That world, of course, has changed dramatically because having invested that effort, having made Guyana an attractive destination for investment, having attracted investors, including in the oil and gas industry, in the first instance, to do exploration.
Yeah.
That is what brought ExxonMobil, for example, to do exploration. And of course, all of the other investors in so many other sectors of the economy. Having done that work, we are today in a place where Guyana is and has been the fastest growing economy in the world, has been growing, has been outperforming, not only outperforming all comparators, but has been dominating global economic growth performance and global economic growth projections. If you look at the regional economic outlook published by the International Monetary Fund for the Western Hemisphere, if you look at the World Economic Outlook published also by the International Monetary Fund, both of those publications were updated during the spring meetings. And then, of course, the UN ECLAC just issued updated economic projections recently too. You see Guyana outperforming every other country in the hemisphere in terms of real economic growth. And not only historically, but also prospectively, looking ahead in the years that are yet to come. And this isn't just a growth statistic. It reflects a reality. This is being lived and felt by Guyanese people every day. And it reflects a reality that the global community recognizes and has tremendous respect for, because they know that this story is not only about the discovery of oil. The international community knows that this story is about a sustained effort to build an attractive destination for investment, a sustained effort to build a conducive policy framework to preserve not only macroeconomic stability, but to be able to realize sustainable macroeconomic growth and to preserve and protect our macroeconomic fundamentals for long-term sustainability. The international community knows this. because they too have been in this journey. They have seen the journey that Guyana has traveled from very tough times to now these very different economic circumstances. And so now the engagement has changed significantly because we are a significant contributor now to regional economic growth. We are a significant contributor to aggregate output in the oil and gas, well, in oil in particular, thus far. So that alone, the mere fact that we are now an economy that is growing rapidly, that economic outcomes in Guyana matter so much more significantly for aggregate Caribbean economic outcomes and the overall Caribbean economic outlook. That alone has contributed to a significant change in the engagement. But more importantly, far more importantly in my mind, the international community also recognizes that in this government, in successive People's Progressive Party civic government, and in this generation of the People's Progressive Party civic government led by President Irfan Ali, the international community has found a political leadership that, like you quite rightly said, that has provided a good example to the world of policy making and policy implementation and execution that is worthy of emulation. And in fact, over and beyond just building a policy framework and implementing it, that in fact has provided strong intellectual and thought leadership, again to use your phrase, on a number of the critical and pressing matters that face the world. And so the whole engagement has changed significantly, with greater interest in what is happening in Guyana, not necessarily from the standpoint of what assistance and advice can be provided to Guyana. And of course, we are always happy to accept assistance from our partners, and we're always happy to receive advice and to listen to alternative perspectives, because that is in our DNA. And we will always continue to listen to other views and listen to advice, and we may not necessarily always agree with it, but we will always listen to it and debate it. And some of it we will accept, some of it we will debate, some of it we will interact with and evolve and our thinking and evolve the thinking of the counterparty on. So we're a listening government, and we're always open to listening, and particularly listening to others, the opinions of others and the advice of others. But the engagement has changed now significantly, with more people seeking out Guyana's views, more members of the international community seeking out Guyana's views, seeking out a kind of engagement and a kind of partnership that is not so much characterized by assistance and official development assistance and aid and those historic modes of engagement, but more recognizing Guyana as a destination for investment, a country in which economic and commercial ties have great promise for deepening, and looking at ways in which those ties can be deepened, including, of course, our bilateral partners, and in fact seeking our views on some of the pressing issues that confront the world and some of the pressing issues that confront the region.
But I'm happy that you made that point, because there is the perception by some that we are where we are in terms of this strategic positioning simply because of the discovery of oil and gas. And I'm happy that you provided the history, because what it signals is that for years it's been part of, as you said, the DNA of the People's Progressive Party civic administration, successive administrations, to follow a disciplined blueprint for progress. And that is what brought us back from the brink of bankruptcy. That is also what is responsible for the degree of development or transformation we're seeing today, and now being looked at as a benchmark
Absolutely.
That's not by accident.
It's not by accident.
Okay.
Absolutely. And that point must never be forgotten.
Now,
We did not get here by accident. We got here by
indeed.
hard work.
Indeed. Now, we also see that Guyana, and as you said, its plans for development, we're featuring in other spaces too. For example, the president will be leading a delegation to the Offshore Technology Conference in this coming week, and he will also be leading, well, the vice president, rather. He also engaged the King's Foundation. What do these type of engagements signal about the story of where we are today and where we're heading?
Well, here again, you chose two excellent examples. You made reference to OTC and you spoke of President Ali leading a large Guyanese delegation to OTC. I am not sure if you said it. If you did, please forgive me. But if you didn't, I think it is worth saying. Not only will President Ali be leading a large delegation to OTC, but he will be delivering the feature address at the opening of OTC. That itself tells you Guyana's place and, of course, President Ali's place in the global arena and in the global conversations around subject matters that are relevant to us. Because Guyana will be taking center stage at OTC this year under President Ali's leadership. In the early years, we attended. This year, President Ali is listed as the feature speaker at the opening. And that tells the journey. And here again, that journey alone these are not accidental occurrences. People listen to hear what you have to say. They examine whether they believe you have something to say of value. And it is on that basis they engage with you. And the fact that Guyana has been elevated to the prominence that we have been elevated to in OTC 2026 speaks volumes about Guyana's place in the oil and gas industry worldwide, in the offshore technology subsector, which is what OTC focuses on, and the extremely high regard with which Guyana is held globally, and the extremely high regard with which President Irfan Ali is held globally. I think OTC provides an excellent example, illustration of that. I'm glad too that you mentioned the King's Foundation and Vice President Jagdeo's engagement with the King's Foundation, his meeting with King Charles and his other engagements.
Yes.
And here again, this was not a one-off engagement. Vice President Jagdeo, when he was president, as President Bar Jagdeo, initiated the process that led to the first low-carbon development strategy, that led to the first bilateral engagement with the Kingdom of Norway that saw Guyana earning $250 million for the climate services that were provided globally, led the effort to have the global community recognize the contribution that standing forests make in the fight against climate change, led the fight for that contribution to be valued and ultimately to be remunerated or monetized. It is that early work that led to the concepts such as avoided deforestation, the plus in REDD+. It is that work that was led by Guyana and in particular by then President Jagdeo that led ultimately to Guyana being able today to have an updated low carbon development strategy, to have carbon credits that are now globally certified for sale, to be able to conclude transactions at scale. We concluded $750 million US dollars worth of sale of carbon credits with the Hess Corporation. We concluded the sale of our carbon credits to 19 international airlines because we were the first country to obtain global certification under the Corsia standard, the UN standard for carbon offset for use by the international aviation industry. We got there by being the first country to achieve jurisdiction scale certification of our carbon credits. These things don't happen by magic, they don't happen by good luck, and they don't happen by accident. Perhaps it would be nice if they happened by good luck and by accident, perhaps, I don't know. But they don't happen by good luck, by good fortune, by fortuitous circumstances. They require vision. They require, but not only vision, they require clarity of vision. They require dedication of purpose, because you can have a vision and not have the wherewithal to realize that vision by dint of hard work. They require credibility, because your audience, and here your audience is a global audience, must view you as credible. They require credibility. And they require being willing, endurance, and being willing to do this continuously until the desired objective is achieved. When we started with the development under, like I said, the then leadership of President Jack Deo, when we started conceptualizing the low carbon development strategy, carbon markets didn't exist like they do today. And this whole conversation with the aviation industry and aviation offsets didn't exist. But here we are today with globally certified carbon credits that we can sell to the international aviation industry. And for me, it's very gratifying, when you read the IATA press release and you see that Guyana is the first country that is able to sell globally certified carbon credits to the aviation industry. Small Guyana, tiny little Guyana, occupying such positions of leadership, whether it is in the sale of carbon credits for aviation offset targets to be met, or Guyana taking center stage at OTC, or Guyana taking center stage in the food security agenda in CARICOM, or Guyana taking center stage as the physical and economic bridge between northern Brazil and the Caribbean and the rest of the world. These, and I could go on, there's so many other examples, right? Guyana demonstrating that it is possible for a country to lift itself out of from being a heavily indebted poor country where we were in the early 1990s to being the fastest growing economy in the world where we are today.
That's a remarkable story, though.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, people speak of, there's a phrase, people speak about punching above your weight.
Yes.
That phrase is bandied around. We just had international championship title boxing in Guyana.
Yes.
It's a boxing metaphor or a boxing analogy. People speak about punching above your weight. But Guyana has for a very long time been punching above, we've been punching above our weight. And what we are witnessing taking place in Guyana today is the result of precisely that.
There's a perception about the contributions small states can make. With all that we've discussed thus far about Guyana, do you think we have fundamentally disrupted the way the world ought to perceive contributions from small states and what that should look like?
Well, I mean, you are right that, historically small states have been perceived as having, a number of distinguishing characteristics. And for a variety of reasons, small states have not only faced their own inherent vulnerabilities, and we were not, and still are not, immune from those, but historically have not had the weight of voice that perhaps We should have as a community of small
Yes.
states. So no doubt that has historically been the lament of the collective of small states, that we sometimes don't have a voice at the table. I wouldn't say that that reality has disappeared completely. I think Guyana is still a small state, and there are still a number of arenas in which we are fighting for a voice at the table, and we will continue to fight for that voice at the table or that seat at the table. But I think, so I certainly wouldn't say that that reality has been completely rewritten or erased. We are still fighting some of the disadvantages of being a small state, including challenges in relation to voice and representation. But I would say that we have demonstrated that small states do have the capacity to lead. Well, I would say we have demonstrated, first of all, that small states do have the capacity to succeed. And the Guyana economic story has demonstrated that. But in addition to that, we've demonstrated that we've also, I believe, demonstrated that small states have the capacity to lead and to provide good examples that are worthy of emulation and replication. And I think we've provided a number of examples in that regard, where Guyana has built models, innovated and built models that today are eminently worthy of emulation, replication by others around the world. I think there are a number of examples that I can think of.
The reason I asked that question is because when you reflect on the achievements, the inroads we've made on the environmental front, and when I think about what we have decided to do as a country, what the president has pushed us to the front lines to do with the Global Biodiversity Alliance, something that no other country within our weight class, as we were talking about, has stepped up to the forefront to do. It is clear to me, and it signals, I'm sure, to the rest of the citizenry, that we will not be held back by any means by the perceptions that may be lingering out there about small states. We're stepping up to be part of some very important global fights. So I just wanted to make that particular point because it, in my view, it sort of shatters a number of perceptions about what is possible and what you think you can contribute to.
You are absolutely correct. And, if we were to pull together all of the strands of the various
Yeah.
strands of what we've been speaking to date, I think there is no doubt at all that Guyana enjoys a far more significant place in the region and in the world than we have ever enjoyed. Occupied, I should say. Guyana occupies a far more significant place in the region, in the hemisphere, and in the world than we have ever occupied at any other point in our country's history. And I want to say this too, that we mustn't discount, we mustn't lose sight of the importance of vision.
Yes.
And we have in this era the good fortune of a president who has demonstrated vision. President Ali is a very
Yes.
visionary person. He's an ideas person. He's full of ideas. And those of us who have had the privilege of working with him will know that, when you think of President Irfan Ali, you think of boldness, of vision, boldness in general. You think of boldness, you think of visionary leadership. And there is no doubt in my mind that President Irfan Ali's boldness, his visionary leadership, have been an important, an indispensable contributor to Guyana occupying the place that we occupy today in the global community and in the Western Hemisphere and in the Caribbean. There's no
Indeed.
doubt in my mind that President Ali's, the boldness of his vision, sometimes even his audacity, the audacity of his vision, you know, the daring to challenge the status quo, daring to redefine and rewrite the way we do things. We've always done things, daring to challenge the norms and redefining them. And perhaps on another occasion, I will come back to speak with some examples
Yes.
about this, how under President Ali's leadership, the status quo has been challenged and norms that we've always assumed have been rewritten simply because of the audacity and boldness of his vision and his leadership.
Minister, I want to shift our conversation now to foreign direct investment. According to the 2024 Bank of Guyana report, foreign direct investment grew by 43.5%. This is essentially 10.4 billion US dollars. What are investors seeing in Guyana that perhaps some critics may still be underestimating, or they're trying to, as Guyanese would say, water down?
Well, clearly, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves and the results speak for themselves. Clearly, the international investment community sees in Guyana one of the most attractive places in which to put their investment dollars. And you're seeing that in several sectors, not just one or two, and not just oil and gas for sure. You're certainly seeing it in oil and gas because we have some of the biggest global companies coming to Guyana and wanting to invest in Guyana. You have, of course, ExxonMobil. You have, of course, Chevron. You have, of course, CNOOC. You have Chevron. You previously had Hess. You have, of course, Total Energy. You have, of course, Qatar Energy. You have, of course, Petronas. These are global. These are global giants. But you have also, I mean, obviously you have Schlumberger, you have Halliburton, you have Baker Hughes, you have Saipem, you have SBM, you have Modec. These are big global giants establishing operations in Guyana, establishing a presence in Guyana, growing their operations in Guyana, investing in Guyana. But outside of oil and gas and service provision to oil and gas, you have in the non-oil sector, you have, for example, in the agricultural space, you have international investors like Bloomberg Grains coming to partner with us in the development of the regional food hub. You have in the tourism and hospitality space, you have global and regional investors coming to invest in the tourism and hospitality space. We just opened, President Ali just opened, for example, the 4 Points by Sheraton Hotel. Just the latest in a succession of hotels that have been internationally branded hotels, some built with foreign capital, some built with domestic capital. And so without a doubt, and we could go through every single sector and you'll see the overwhelming reality that not only do foreign investors see in Guyana one of the most attractive destinations for their places in which to put their investment dollar, if not the most attractive place to put their investment dollar. But more and more Guyanese people are also, more and more Guyanese investors and more Guyanese entrepreneurs are also seeing Guyana as the most attractive place to live, invest, work, and like I said, even potential to learn, retire. More and more Guyanese people are recognizing this. And you see this with the growth of Guyanese entrepreneurship. You see this with the number of Guyanese businesses that are establishing themselves or growing raising capital, growing their business, entering strategic partnerships, entering joint ventures with international companies, something that President Ali has pushed aggressively, joint ventures and consortia, which is something that he believes fervently. You know, he constantly speaks about building a consortium, entering a joint venture, entering strategic partnerships with international companies, something he feels passionately about and has been pushing aggressively as a vehicle to leverage, to use Guyanese capital, Guyanese entrepreneurial spirit, Guyanese labor even, and leveraging those to bring global technology, world-class technology, global expertise, sectoral expertise that perhaps we do not have, a global track record that maybe we might not have because we are now starting out in the particular sector of interest. So, for example, the local content legislation is a classic example of a policy vehicle that we have used to realize that objective. Today, I can think of dozens of Guyanese companies. They have land, they have Guyanese personnel, they have Guyanese capital, but they might not have a long track record of providing certain types of services to the oil and gas industry or to the international community. They enter a strategic partnership with an international company that brings their technology, brings their track record, their experience and expertise. And these Guyanese companies are now competing with companies from all over the rest of the world to do business in areas where we never did business before. And to develop capabilities in areas in which we never had capabilities before. And so, you know, this tells me that the global investment community, both foreign and domestic, recognize that Guyana is amongst the most attractive destinations for investment worldwide.
Minister, the investment climate is indeed attractive, and it does provide that environment for Guyana to dream and realize as well its ambition to be the regional industrial powerhouse. How do you see a Guyanese fitting into that equation?
Well, powerhouse is not usually a word that I would use. I try to be a little bit more modest in the language that I would use. But it's okay for you to use it. It's okay for you to use it. And I understand what you mean, and I agree with you fully. It's just not a word that I would typically use. But you're absolutely correct that we are emerging as, you know, far more significant player in every sphere of economic activity, including, of course, industrial activity, manufacturing activity, and so on. And this has clearly resulted in opportunities for Guyanese investors and for Guyanese nationals. And it would probably take us another program for me to go through the entire gamut of examples. But I want to just give, you know, if you look at what the first gas pipeline, which has landed at Wales, which I think would, you know, I have no doubt that you have that in mind when you think of this industrial
Absolutely.
powerhouse, to use your word. The first gas pipeline that landed in Wales, the second gas pipeline that will land in Berbice. Let's just take those two alone. The electricity that will be generated in Wales lays the foundation for industrial activity on a scale like we've never seen before. You're going to have the NGL plant. You're going to have the capability for us to start fertilizer manufacture. You're going to have the capability for us potentially to have other manufacturers. You're going to have the capability for us to have our first data centers. You know, we entered a strategic MOU with Cerebras to establish Guyana's first data center. With that first gas pipeline. The second gas pipeline, and then of course you have all of everything else that's going to trigger, including the logistics a chain that will unfold, and I mean, you have when logistics might sound like an elaborate word, but we're speaking here about transportation providers, truck drivers, truck owners, people who own a transportation fleet, boats and barges. Those are all opportunities for Guyanese investors and for Guyanese workers. And then scale that up. Scale that up to what's going to happen in Berbice with the second gas pipeline and the volume of gas that's going to bring, which will allow us to be able finally, potentially, to develop our bauxite resources into potentially processing into alumina. And there are a number of international companies that are interested in processing Guyanese bauxite into alumina. Fertilizer manufacture at scale. The emergence of an entire petrochemical industry at scale. The emergence of a whole data center industry around data centers, again, at scale. You think about it, the possibilities are, I don't want to say limitless or boundless, but they are all, if you allow your imagination, if you extrapolate up, if you look at what is happening now with the first pipeline, which, I mean, we haven't, the full potential of that will be realized when we, plug the electricity plant into the pipeline and start to utilize those resources. But if you look at what is happening already now, just with the build out of the gas pipeline and the build out of the power plant and the NGL plant, if you just look at that alone, not the coming into operation, and you look at how West Demerara has been transformed. I don't know if you remember the before, but if you look at the west bank of Demerara, west coast of Demerara, including, look at Leonora. Leonora is like a bustling city. Its own hospital, its own mall, its own bank. And, that's only with the build out of the first gas pipeline, not the deployment of its output, and not with all of the industrial activity that will be triggered as a consequence. Then you multiply that over, extrapolate that over to the mouth of the Berbice River, and you think about the demand for every single thing, whether it is demand for accommodation, for housing, for hotel rooms, for hospital, for restaurant tables, for transportation providers, for service providers, for engineers, for lawyers, for economists, for accountants, for painters, for electricians, for maintenance personnel. The opportunities are, like I said, I try to stay away from the superlatives, right? So I try to stay away from.
It sounds like you're defining a powerhouse to me.
As you can tell, I'm struggling to avoid the word, but it looks like I'm failing dismally. Right? Yes. It looks like I'm trying to avoid the word, but failing dismally. I don't typically use words like powerhouse and boundless and limitless and so on. But it sounds very much like what would be characterized as limitless and boundless opportunities, like a veritable powerhouse.
Yes.
Even if I'm only using your word and not my word in that instance. So this is a really incredibly exciting time for Guyana and for every single Guyanese person. And so, if I had to, I would advise every single Guyanese person, particularly young people, get the skills now, upskill yourself now, train and retrain and uptrain. If you haven't completed high school, get a high school diploma under the Gold Scholarship Program. If you've completed your high school, or you have a high school diploma, try to get a diploma or a degree, or go to a technical institute and get a certification. If you've completed one, get another certification and get some experience and start to work. Build your portfolio of qualifications and experience now.
And the beautiful thing about that is that all of that training is free.
And it's all free. And it's all free. It's not free by accident. Because President Ali has said every single Guyanese person of working age must be equipped and able to get a good quality job and earn a good quality income. That's why we've made it free. Because we know what is coming down the road in terms of job opportunities and entrepreneurial opportunities. And this is the time for the Guyanese people to get themselves ready for those opportunities.
Before I close with our final question, Minister, we are just weeks away from our 60th independence. What do you want citizens to remember about the way in which we've stepped up as a country for this moment?
I would like citizens, and I really like that question. I like it. And I would ask the citizens of Guyana to acquaint themselves, if they are not already acquainted, with the entirety of that journey. It's easy to get caught up in today's moment. It's easy to remember we're all human beings, and people generally have short memories. And that's understandable. We're all guilty, we're susceptible to that, and we're all guilty of it, I suspect. It would be easy to remember only today, or yesterday and today. It would be easy to remember only this era of Guyana's history. I would implore every single Guyanese citizen, including and in particular the young, who are being born and who are growing up in this period, to acquaint themselves with the entire journey. Because this has not been an easy road. This has been a long and arduous journey. Not a painstaking or a burdensome one, but it has been an arduous journey, one that has required hard work. And the gains that we now see didn't drop from the sky by magic. And like I said earlier, they didn't happen by accident. They were hard won. We worked hard on every occasion throughout the journey to building the modern Guyana. Every step in that journey was important, and every battle was important. The fight, first of all, by our foreparents to free themselves from slavery and emancipation, into emancipation. The throwing off the shackles of that most heinous of crimes against humanity, African slavery or enslavement of our African ancestors. The fight to throw off the shackles of indentureship. The fight for political independence. The fight for universal adult suffrage, the right for every person of adult age to have a vote. Today we take it for granted. There was a time when not everybody had the right to vote. Then there was a time when everybody, notwithstanding they had the right to vote, that right was taken away from them because they didn't have the right to choose the government of their choice because of the loss of democracy. So the fight for democracy, and then subsequently the fight to preserve our democracy and to protect our democracy when it came under threat, including as recently as 2020. The fight to to lift our people out of poverty. The fight to lift our country out of bankruptcy into fiscal solvency, and ultimately into fiscal out of bankruptcy into fiscal solvency, and then into fiscal sustainability, and ultimately into prosperity. This has not been a journey that just unfolded itself by magic. It took a lot of hard work and a lot of sacrifice by our ancestors and our predecessors. And I would urge every single Guyanese citizen, as we celebrate our 60th anniversary as independent Guyana, I would urge every single Guyanese person to ensure that they acquaint themselves with the whole of this journey, to ensure that their children are acquainted with this journey, because this is our history. This is our story. And our story did not start yesterday. It did not start in 2019 with forest oil. It did not start in 2015 with the discovery of oil. Our story started a long time before that. This is our story. This has been our journey. The Guyanese people being the our to whom I refer here, the we or the our to whom I refer here. And so on the 60th independence anniversary, I urge my Guyanese brothers and sisters to acquaint or reacquaint themselves with the entirety of our journey, and to commit ourselves to continue to work hard to move our country in the right direction, as we have been doing in recent years.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. I want to now share with you our last question. For season 3, we do something a bit different, which is our previous guests, they leave a question for the next without knowing who that person might be. And our previous guest was Minister of Human Services and Social Security, Dr. Vindhya Prasad. Here's her question for you. In a world where there are only 8 women leaders, how do you feel about women having more than just a seat at the table, but also owning that table?
You said the question was posed by Minister Vindhya Prasad.
Yes.
Vindhi is my cabinet colleague. She is my comrade. And of course, she's my sister too. And in fact, I've known Vindhi for all of my life. But I have to say that, and I rarely disagree with her, but I have to say, or I'm tempted to say rather, that I disagree with the premise of the question. Because the question speaks of 8 women leaders. And I suspect I know what she's referring to. I suspect she's referring to 8, perhaps there are 8 heads of government or 8 heads of state worldwide. But, and I'm firmly of the view that the world would be better served if we had more than 8 heads of government or heads of state who were women. So I'm fully aligned with her in her thinking in that regard. But where I disagree with the premise of the question, because the question was not about 8 heads of government, it was about 8 women leaders, I disagree with the premise that leadership can be used interchangeably with being head of government or head of state. Because there are women leaders in every sphere of human endeavor. And one doesn't have to be prime minister or president to be or a woman doesn't have to be prime minister or president to be a leader. There are women leading some of the largest companies of the world today. They're women leaders. They're women leading some of the most important and influential and innovative academic institutions and think tanks. They're women leading some of the most highly regarded media houses. There are women leading in every sphere of human endeavor and at every tier of human endeavor. There are women leading. There's a woman leader sitting across the table from me today, leading and blazing a trail in her chosen field of endeavor. And I would consider you a woman. You don't have to be a prime minister or a president of a country for me to consider you a woman leader. You're very much a woman leader already.
Thank you.
And there are. So I guess there are women leading in their homes today. There are women leading in the workplace today. And so I guess I know where the question was coming from, that perhaps at the highest level of government there should be more women leaders, and I agree with that. I really do believe that the world would be a better place if there were more women at the helm of governments around the world. But I disagree with the premise that women, that leadership by women only manifests itself or should only be considered in the context of heading governments. I don't believe there are only 8 women leaders. I see a lot of women leading, Minister of India Prasad herself being one of them, in their respective spheres of endeavor. And sometimes in not so glamorous spheres of endeavor too. You know, there are women leading in their communities doing very quiet, invisible things, and they are also women leaders, and they're doing a phenomenal job. I think the world is certainly served better by women taking up positions of leadership. I think we are a better world when more women are in positions of leadership. And I, you know, but I would not go as far as to, you know, transpose being a head of government or a head of state to be a woman leader.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singh. Minister, I appreciate the time that you took to share some very crucial insights regarding the dramatic shift that we've seen in the past few years about the way the world sees us and how we have essentially stepped up to offer the thought leadership that ensures we stand out in so many different ways. Thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
To our audience, thank you as well for joining us. This has been your episode of Starting Point. I'll see you next week, same time, same place, as we bring you more insights from our leaders across this country. Take care.
Thanks for watching Starting Point. Follow us on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn for critical updates and exclusive content.